Storytelling is how I ended a cycle of generational trauma for my family. Just like the light and mirrors of a kaleidoscope make ordinary objects appear magical, storytelling works the same way. The components of a kaleidoscope are objects, mirror, and light. Similarly, in storytelling, our life experiences are the objects. The storyteller is the light illuminating our life experiences. The audience is the mirror, reflective surfaces, reflecting back bits and pieces of the storyteller's story in revelatory and new ways. Today, I'm going to demonstrate to you how storytelling, through the science of a kaleidoscope, can turn trauma into a magical gift. I'm a storyteller. I inherited this identity from my family. There are stories that pass down information and values, stories that also pass down trauma. We've got lots of stories about expectations, a few about self-sacrifice, not so many about failure. Then there are the stories that are dangerously incomplete. I feel most compelled to tell these stories because silence can perpetuate trauma. It was February 1976. Mom was very pregnant with me. Dad just knew he was having a boy, so refused to discuss any girl names. Look, Stephen, if it's a boy, name him anything you want. But if it's a girl, let me finish. Name her Stephanie after you. Mom is smart, MIT smart, and strategic. Well, when I finally arrived, Dad immediately nicknamed me Chairman Mao. The great communist leader he so greatly respected because of our similar hairlines. A few hours later, Grandma arrived at the hospital room door. Dad greeted her with his usual good manners and a kiss and escorted her to Mom's bedside to meet me for the first time. She leaned over into Mom's arms for a better look. "Oh, she pretty." Grandma's accent is from Barbados. "But she dark." But the word "but" has no place in a congratulation to a new mother, especially not from her own mother. "Oh, well, she'll have to be smart then." Colorism, classism, sexism are classic Grandma. Without warning, Mom's already large eyes metamorphosed to the size of launchable projectiles. Bulging and transfixed, they were like two heat-seeking missiles locking onto Grandma, unfortunately a familiar target. "Get out." Dad unselfishly jumped in front of Grandma just in time, ushering her quickly but carefully out the door. What, Stephen? Tell me what I see." I have been telling this story for decades. Now that it is my story, I can reflect it back to you with humor. But why am I still telling the pretty but she dark version of my birth story? Now, here, to you. Well, this story shaped my identity. Retelling this story in this way maintains my beliefs about Grandma and ultimately about myself. The most important story to our family is about Grandma immigrating to the United States. See, the narrative of that story makes sure that our values and expectations will be passed on to the next generation. It was May Day, 1945. Grandma arrived in New York City holding only one suitcase weighing 44 pounds. But it was the weight of her grandfather's parting words that were the heaviest. "Baby girl, on your own land, so you can stand up and pee, and nobody can tell you move." Grandma obeyed. In 1958, she bought a 3-story, 5-family house in Cambridge, Massachusetts for $12,500. With that house, Grandma was our bank. Every important ritual in that house took place in Grandma's house. Grandpapa taught me and my younger brother how to wind our waist to calypso music. Nanny, wind down low. Nanny, wind down slow. Nanny, wine. Nanny, wine. Grandma made sure that her house would be our inheritance and would fight anyone, including Grandpapa, to protect it. Lawrence, stop keeping so much noise. Go back in the kitchen then. Lawrence, turn down the music. We have tenants downstairs, Lawrence. Nobody asked you in here, Agnes. Nagnes. And they always argued about who was more deserving of their American citizenship, especially when they had an audience. Go back to Barbados then. Lawrence, I'm naturalized. So, I was born in this country. I fought for my country. Lawrence, you only wore the uniform. You went in and the war was over. Grandpapa earned the GI Bill, but Grandma knew what to do with it. She sacrificed a lot to build our family's generational wealth. And she expected in return that every one of her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and every descendant thereafter would go to college, get married, and buy a house as proof of our intelligence, our morality, our worth. No pressure. Since I wasn't born the right color or the right gender, to become a homeowner was the last option left to make Grandma proud of me. I had to create a narrative that would rival Grandma's immigrant rags to riches story. Instead of buying a house that our family could live in, we bought a fixer-upper instead. There was so much water damage, so much black mold that every inspector and contractor that we talked to just shook their head no and walked away. Through summer and winter, our daily uniform was a hazmat suit, rubber steel-toe boots, work gloves taped at the wrists, a helmet, and a full-face respiratory mask. My husband and I were constantly swinging hammers and yanking on crowbars. On more than one occasion, I fell off the ladder. My husband fell through the floor once. It was all too common to be impaled by rusty nails. After a while, our bodies became machines. Our hands froze in hammer-like grips overnight. In the morning, we manually pried open our fingers, a condition known as trigger finger. Then depression came. There were months when I couldn't even drive past our house, let alone go inside to fix it. But this was the level of self-sacrifice needed in order to make Grandma proud of me. I began writing stories, family stories that helped me to understand that the narrative that I spent my life constructing about homeownership, self-sacrifice, hard work, now threatened to bury me. I didn't want my daughter to inherit incomplete and false narratives about homeownership. I didn't want our family legacy to impoverish her psychologically. In order to cancel this ancestral debt, I had to get to our origin story. Not telling our stories, staying silent can be deadly. Grandma rarely talked about her own mother. The most common story that she told about her was, "My mother died of pride." But the fuller story was that Ethelinda Wilhelmina, great-grandma, was a grown woman and widow of several years when her parents sent her to the United States. They were ashamed of her affair that resulted in the birth of my grandmother, Agnes. In a New England winter, too poor to heat her apartment, too prideful to ask her younger sisters for help, she died of tuberculosis, leaving Grandma an orphan at 3 years old. Grandma held the secret of her birth for more than 60 years in silence. I learned this story when I was 11 on a trip to Barbados with my mother and grandmother. We pulled up into the driveway after a long day of shopping when Grandma spontaneously burst into tears. We rarely saw Grandma cry. Mom and I finally made sense of her words. I'm illegitimate. Grandma was ashamed, inherited the shame of being born to unwed parents. That she was an orphan was a narrative constructed by her maternal grandparents. In actuality, it was great-grandma Ethelinda Wilhelmina's story, the silence of her story, that was the root of our family's shame. Coming between mother and daughter, shame became ancestral debt, compounded with each successive generation's silence. But telling our stories allows us to reclaim the power it has over us. We get to choose the new narrative to believe and to pass on. Grandma's father was desperate to lay eyes on baby Agnes just once. Before great-grandma Ethelinda Wilhelmina was sent away, she helped disguise him as a watchmaker so he could come to the house and fix the family's large grandfather clock that sat in the hall. There, he laid eyes on baby Agnes and wanted to raise her. As Grandma's tears fell, she began to own more of her own story. The old black and white narratives became vibrant, multi-patterned reflections. The more Grandma shared, the more beautiful her story became. She wasn't an orphan. She was a baby girl much desired by both her parents. Releasing decades of shame allowed her to adopt a new narrative, unencumbered by ancestral debt, one that she could really be proud of. Knowing Grandma's birth story allowed me to have empathy for her. It allowed me to see her as fallible and human. I now understood why Grandma lived such an ambitious, self-sacrificing, and blameless life. Knowing her story meant that I didn't have to do the same. Standing here, being witnessed by you, helps me to own more of my story, to re-narrate my mistakes, and to break the silence of shame. Neuroscience research explains that while you all have been sitting here for the past several hours, the neurons in your brain have been firing. They call them mirror neurons, in synchronized patterns with my brain and in the brains of everyone else in the audience around you. They call this neurocoupling. And more recent research shows that all of our hearts in here have been speeding up and slowing down at the same rate, meaning that our hearts are in sync too. Re-narrating the narratives is looking back on my life through a kaleidoscope. You are the mirror, spinning Grandma's stories, reflecting them to me, to each other, over and over and over, with fresh perspective, more layered, more vibrant, a magical gift. This is in remembrance of our ancestral ancestors. My great-great-great-grandma Ruth, Elizabeth, Ethelinda, and Agnes, and all that came before. You opened up the door. 'Cause of you, change gone come. Thank you for reflecting back.